Season 2 is certainly taking its time to get us back into space. Hey, Drew here, and episode 4 of For All Mankind Season 2. The pace is definitely picking up. I continue to enjoy this season, but again, I am surprised at the level of time that it's taking them to get back into space, as I said. This episode, I have a little bit of a problem with the way that they've developed Joel Kinnaman's Ed Baldwin this season. I feel that the 9-year gap has created some problems for the storytelling, and particularly with his character, because last season we saw him not really get to deal with the death of a child, and this season he spent 9 years grounded so that he could be with his wife, so that he could be here on Earth. And then in the course of an episode and a half, like one conversation with his wife, and suddenly he's decided that he's okay with going to space again. I feel that given the fact that we're supposed to believe that he spent the last 9 years not telling his wife that he wasn't going to space because he wanted to stay there and be there for the family, which is a little bit hard to swallow. Like, I would think that they would be very, very concerned for the state of their marriage if I were her, that he spent 9 years not telling her this. But putting that aside, that one conversation could change his mind so quickly that it's like, oh, all he was doing was waiting for his wife to give him permission to go back up. And it's like, no, I feel that this was a personal decision that he made, and it would have taken more than a conversation, even the conversation last episode and this conversation, to move him along on this path. I'm not really buying it. I'm going to have to swallow my disbelief, because obviously this is all the development we're going to get. But I was really expecting it to take a lot longer for him to get back into space. But this episode, he pulls a deke and puts himself in charge of the next mission to the moon on Pathfinder, which is, the glitzy new rocket that NASA has. And again, I've questioned a lot of the nepotism that this character has shown. And this episode, it was on full display. I feel like it's pretty obvious that there's some issues with putting Gordo back into space, clearly. And, I feel that the performance of Michael Dorman is doing a lot to make this character very, very both sympathetic, and he's also someone that, despite, the fact that he seems to be a little bit of a walking time bomb, he has all these things. He can't really tell if he's having an hallucination sometimes with these red ants that appear on his Coke bottle, or whether, something is real. And, it just seems to me that to a large extent, if he was not Ed Baldwin's friend, who on earth would be advocating for him to go back to space after all these years of being grounded? I don't think anyone would. And truth be told, I'm not entirely convinced that it would be so easy for people just to put themselves on missions to the moon. But I digress. The coolest aspect this episode, I feel like, was the test flight that they had of these jets. And I felt like, it was a pretty nifty scene. I think it shows a lot of how much money is getting put into streaming shows these days. We haven't gotten a lot of these types of sequences so far this season, but this was pretty cool. The special effects were pretty good, and it was, amazing just to see the speed that these jets can fly at. But I was confused. Some of the maneuvers they did, I'm like, there is no way that they would be allowed to do that, or that they would voluntarily do that. Like, I feel like this show likes to portray astronauts and pilots as hot shots, kind of do some Top Gun portrayals. But to me, that maneuver that Ed does, where his jet just spins out, I was like, there's no frickin' way that he would ever do that or be allowed to do that. And it's just, you would black out, I would think. But anyway, I'm not really an expert. Let me know if you think that was a plausible maneuver for a jet, and if you think that any trained pilot would ever do that. I liked the end of this episode, the way that they had this sequence where it was pretty tense when Ed, is in his plane and the engine starts to malfunction and give off smoke and he has to eject. I thought that was a pretty tense sequence. I've seen, scenes of Ed past this in the trailer, so I kind of was pretty sure he wasn't going to die, but I still felt myself wondering, are they going to kill him off? Because I think the fact that they've grounded his story so much in his relationship with his wife and his daughter has made me feel, okay, he's a pretty valid candidate for early exit if they want to give the audience a gut punch and kind of switch the dynamics in the story. So I was pretty sure that was a possibility, especially since this episode you see him kind of passing the torch to Molly as far as being in charge of the astronaut program. And, this sequence, I wasn't entirely sure why they ended it when they did. I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be a real cliffhanger, like, will he survive, landing in the ocean? And, is this a situation where we're legitimately supposed to be concerned for his survival? Once he survived, ejecting out of the plane, I stopped really being worried. So I don't feel that perhaps if that is their goal, that was the best goal for them to have. But I was also unclear, is it just trying to show, that there's this constant danger that even when you're just doing something that seems routine, that things can go wrong. And now that he's back in it, his wife is going to have to constantly worry about that again. And he has to consider that when he gets back into it. And maybe it'll be interesting. I mentioned that I was a little bit frustrated that he got so quickly back into the fray. Maybe they'll use this to cause him to re-examine and to consider whether or not he should, go back so quickly. We'll have to wait and see. I had some frustrations this episode. I've talked a lot about how, Ed has showed this nepotism in who he picks for, certain missions. And this episode, I thought it was interesting the way that they handled Danny's character. I liked a lot of this. I liked the fact that the show is grappling with the way that she has been treated differently perhaps than some of her fellow astronauts because of her skin color. I liked the acknowledgement of how the country treated, a lot of black soldiers during Vietnam and, what this did to her husband. But I didn't buy a lot of the way that it broke down, and I feel like it was misguided in the focus. I felt that the way that they developed this, it made it seem, and I think we're meant to believe that she is a very, very competent astronaut and that she deserves to be in charge of a mission. I fully believe that we're meant as an audience to buy into that. But I feel that the way that they framed it, having her go to Ed and demand to be, put in charge of a mission, one, it felt like an odd juxtaposition with her finding out, how her husband had really felt about her involvement with NASA and about his military experience and how, he had put on this patriotic front for her sake, but that wasn't really accurate to how he felt. I feel like it feels odd for her to go from that to, okay, I'm going to double down and look for more authority within the space program. Like that seemed like an odd reaction to me, but also the fact that when she's going to Ed, I thought it was good that she brought up the fact, that there are not that many black astronauts being put in charge of missions and that, that's something that shouldn't be, that it should be more, consistent that people have these opportunities. I think that the important thing, in any given situation is that barriers to people's success be removed, that people not have anything about them be, something that people look at and say, oh, you don't get to be in charge of a mission. We're looking for people like this to do that. I think that that's important, but I feel that the way the episode framed it, it almost made it seem as though the heroes were the people that were putting her in charge of this mission and that it wasn't her merits that were getting her the position, because the way they framed it, you've got Ed, who I appreciate the show's willingness to show that he has some backwards attitudes that he, needs to work on. But to me, what was frustrating with this scene, she comes to him and says, you need to put me in charge. I will be the first black female astronaut to lead a mission. And to me, she should never have been the one to say that. I think it's okay to have the politicians and the people in charge of the program bring it up, but for her to say that makes it sound as though she's trading on identity politics to get this slot. And I think it would have been a stronger choice for her to simply say, I deserve this, and there's no reason that you shouldn't put me in charge. You know that I deserve this, having worked with me in the past. And I think that would have, the audience will know. And I think it was even okay for her to bring up the fact that other astronauts hadn't been given these positions. Other black astronauts hadn't been put in charge of missions very often. But I feel that her drawing attention to the fact that she would be the first black female to be put in charge, that doesn't feel like something the character would say, and it honestly just feels like it's, it makes it seem, it takes away from her accomplishments. I think that was an unfortunate thing for the writers to have her say. And I also, I feel that the sequence after this, when all the characters in the room, start talking about, how they're going to put her in charge because it will be, this great example. It will help with race relations and show, the program isn't racist, essentially. I felt, again, this is realistic. Conversations like this definitely happen. But, the way it was framed, I feel like it was trying to make it like, oh, look, the women and Ed and this other character, they're all banding together, and they're the heroes here because they're the ones who are standing up for diversity. And it's like, well, it's great that Danny has a friend that's in charge of the astronaut program, but a lot of people don't have this. So it shouldn't be like a heroic thing. It should be a sad indictment of a system that, holds people back in spite of their accomplishments. So to me, that made the ending scene in particular, when she's pulling back the tarp from the Apollo spacecraft that she's going to be in charge of, it made that scene ring a little bit hollow to me, when I think it should have been more of a triumphant, and it was framed this way. I think it was framed as a triumphant moment for the character, but to me, I think that it rang a little hollow because of the scenes that came before. This episode also fleshed out Thomas Paine a little bit. I think that it was good to have this scene between him and Ellen where he explained that he actually is passionate about space, even though oftentimes he gets viewed as this person that is just, a politician, and that, he's just doing whatever he can to boost his own career. I felt like this was an important scene because I think that this character, as portrayed up to this point, at times he's come off as a bit of a cliche. He's just the person, it's been easy for the show to shove him into the role that he, says that the way that other people view him, that's kind of the way that the show has viewed him, I feel, up to this point. So I felt like it was a good scene. And also, I think it shows, how there's this kind of acknowledgement here that he is similar in some ways to Ellen, in that he plays a different role with lots of different people. And she is, playing a different role pretty much everywhere, but she's even playing a role at home to a certain extent, because she's not in a real marriage. She's in a marriage to allow herself to continue to have this career because she can't be honest about who she is. And I imagine this show, her character's arc is probably going to be eventually her, coming out publicly as a sign of authenticity, that she can't, have this difference in her private life. And it's interesting to me because who is she authentic with at this point? And it really, the answer seems to be no one. And I feel like that would be a very, very challenging spot to be as a person. Shout out to Shantel VanSanten's Karen. Again, I feel that this is a challenging role. You've got a lot of strong female characters in this show. A lot of strong characters, obviously, across the board, but, a lot of strong women in this show. Danny and Molly and others. And she is this character who is in this supporting role for Ed. She really has nothing to do with NASA and these space missions other than just supporting Ed. And the way that she gives him this push this episode, And you see a little bit of their home life, how she has prepared, his breakfast and set out the newspaper for him and done all this. It's a very, traditional role, and I'm sure some people probably object to that, but I don't feel that the show is portraying her as being repressed particularly. I feel that to a large extent they're showing her as being happy in this role, and they're kind of showing the importance of women like her in their husbands' lives. And I feel like, the thing with women like her is that they have the ability to do what they want to do, that people like Danny have the ability to do what they want to do, and that, people like Karen have the ability to do what they want to do. And I think it's a tricky role, but I feel like she plays it with, Shantel VanSanten plays it with a large degree of sensitivity and nuance, and I've really appreciated it. So those are my thoughts on Pathfinder. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing. Just so you know, my review for American Gods may be a little late coming out this week. I just will have a lot going on this weekend, and it might not get out until early next week, but just want to let you know that in advance so you're not shocked when Sunday or Monday rolls around and the video isn't immediately up. But as I always say, thanks for watching.